You have one precious life. How will you make your money work for you? It's time for Sage Money Conversations, where your financial happiness and confidence are always the subject. Here's your host, certified financial planner, Barbara Norman.
Hello, and welcome to Sage Money Conversations. I am your host, Barbara Norman. We love our listeners, and I'm so happy you tuned in today because we have a very talented and accomplished family law attorney, Dena Nielson. She's had 7 published legal decisions, including one in front of the United States Supreme Court, is a well-known speaker and faculty member at Denver University School of Law and Rose State College in Midwest City, Oklahoma. She has numerous publications. The most recent is her Common Sense Divorce, 10 Steps to Save You Time and Money. She's currently offering a class, How to Divorce with Dignity and Regain Your Self-Worth. And if you go onto her website, you can download her top 10 common tips for managing your divorce. So you can find a link in this podcast. As always, if you want to learn more, you can go to my website, Sage Path Solutions, click on the Learning tab, or set up a conversation, and we can talk about how you can create a financial plan that brings joy and purpose to your life. So Dena's here to talk about how to recover our lives after the loss of a partner and how to handle money conversations in our second and third marriages. Stick in till the end because she's going to give us some dirty little secrets about how she handled money in her own second marriage. So Dena, welcome to the show. We're so pleased to have you. When women go through a divorce, it can be emotionally and financially devastating. And I think, recovering from something like that is really difficult. Our self-worth has kind of been trashed as we've gone through the divorce. Our net worth has been hopefully just cut in half. And then we have to start over again. And so, Dena, you're working on Divorce with Dignity, how to regain our self-worth after a divorce. When someone's gone through something like that, tell me, what are some of the first steps that they would take when they're just trying to kind of regain a new reality?
Well, good morning. And I think what I would say to that is, first of all, you got to work on yourself. Okay. You've got to realize that whoever wanted the divorce doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And you've got to accept what your new reality is going to be. And you have to look at yourself really hard and say, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to go forward? And another thing I think is important is you don't want to carry this anger and hurt and whatever you're feeling. You don't want to carry that with you for years down the road. So my goal or my passion is to try to help people get past it as soon as they can. Now, I know that sounds aspirational and maybe not real practical, but it is, though, a practical thing. And I think the sooner you realize that you can move forward and you can choose to be happy, you can choose to rebuild yourself and your self-worth and your confidence, then you will. But so many people are hit so hard by that divorce that sometimes it takes them a while to get past it.
It is hard. I mean, when I think about it, and you're right, if you carry that anger and that resentment going forward, it can affect your job. It can affect your relationship with your children, your family, your friendships. I mean, it gets old after a while. Yeah. And certainly if you're going into a new relationship, you don't want to carry that legacy with you into the new one because that can certainly affect it too. So if you were giving some nice practical tips to someone who's coming out of it, kind of what are some of the first things that they would start to do for themselves to at least move forward?
Well, I think one thing that I saw a lot of my clients when I was practicing, I would always advise them once the divorce was over. Now, look, you have to extend a caring hand or however you want to say it to your ex-spouse. And of course, there's a lot of anger and even hatred sometimes at that point. And they're looking at me like I'm got 3 heads, but really and truly, if you can get past the anger and say, that person's a human, they have feelings, and I don't have to put up with that anymore. I don't have to live there. I don't have to, be with that person, but I'm going to be civil to that person. And that will help you, because when we were talking about the anger, all that, and you carry that with you, all that does is make you more angry as time goes on.
Yeah.
So you got to drop that. You got to stop it.
It's true. I find that one of the things that helps me most is the gratitude journal, like three things you're grateful for every day. And when I'm divorced, but when I started putting my ex-husband in there, I think it got a little bit easier. I didn't have to be grateful for all the things we went through, but I was grateful for my kids. I was grateful for the times that they had. And so I think that does help it break down a little bit.
And that's actually one of the things that I recommend to my clients is a gratitude journal too. A lot of people take that up and some don't. But one other thing that I thought would be helpful for some people is to write down everything, how you feel about it. Use cuss words. I don't care, whatever you want to do. How do you really feel? Okay, tell me, and write it down in a letter. And then do not send that letter. That's real important. You can burn it up. You can rip it up into shreds, whatever makes you feel better. But sometimes just getting that out.
Yeah.
Because I had clients that came into the office and they were so angry they couldn't even tell me why. I mean, all they could do was cry, and they couldn't get it out what was really the problem. Because I always ask, what seems to be the problem? Why are you here? And if you can't tell me that, it makes me wonder if you really want to be here, Yeah. But I will tell you this. I had an attorney who thought that was a real good thing to do. And so we had a case together and it wasn't going well. So he wrote a letter like that all about me, only he sent it to me.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, it was great. And so I thought, well, should I call him and say, what the heck's going on here? Or what should I do? So finally I decided I would call him. And he immediately came on the phone and he said, I am so sorry. That was the first thing out of his mouth. He said, my therapist told me I should do this when I was upset. And I certainly didn't mean to send it to you. I'm so sorry. He said, let me take you to lunch. I said, no, that's okay. You don't have to take me to lunch.
We've had enough, thanks.
I know how you really feel. So, but anyway, yeah, that was the only time that ever happened. But
Isabel. When I think about divorcing women, especially that silver divorce, because that's where so many people are getting divorced, right? The kids are up and out of the house. The parenting duties are done. They look at each other and it's like, who are you? Mm-hmm. And then they go through a divorce and it's like, their home, their foundation, their income, everything starts over again. Less than what it was before. And I think the embarrassment with friends, if they're out spending money and going to lunches still the way they used to, like where does someone start to rebuild after?
That's a real hard question, because what happens at that point, and they realize that this is going to happen if they get a divorce, but sometimes their marriage has just crumbled years ago and they've just been existing, coexisting in the house. In fact, I had a case where they had been married 48 years. And you would think that somebody that could be married 48 years could just be married, right? But no. And the husband was in a nursing home and the wife wanted to go be with her high school boyfriend.
Oh, wow.
48 years. Yeah. So, so I got the divorce for them. And that it was, probably harder on me than it was for either one of them. But I think you're going to lose half your retirement. You probably will lose the house. Both parties will probably lose the house unless it's paid for, because neither one's going to be able to pay for it. Most likely. And there's just lots of issues there to be dealt with. But the numbers of silver or gray divorces, whichever color you want to call it, is really rising pretty dramatically.
It is. And I worry about people, like, how do you even begin to rebuild? It's a new budget. It's a new home.
And many times those people are retired even and have quit working or whatever, and that makes it pretty difficult. I've seen cases where the husband had to go back to work because the wife had never worked, and divorce was inevitable. That's the word I heard.
Yeah.
And so he had to go back to work at like 67 years old or something. And you don't want to put people in that kind of position.
No. I think about how creative we need to be, especially now with the cost of housing and inflation, what it's at. Half is not half anymore, obviously. So I think about just how can we get creative as women? And I think about as a divorced single mom, my financial plan said, you are not living in that neighborhood. You are not sending your kid to that private school. And it was just, It was devastating. And so I got creative. I rolled up my sleeves. I got on Craigslist back in the day and found another single mom. And we rented a house in that neighborhood. We sent our kids to private schools. And what was great, we'd get in the kitchen and we'd start cooking dinner and we'd drink wine and we would laugh. And, if my daughter would take her son to school and it worked out so well. And I think about all the creative things that we can do when we're recovering from something like this.
That's a great story, by the way. I really like that idea. I would have loved to have that, but
yeah,
I moved from Oklahoma to Colorado and was a single mom of 2 teenagers. So I was worried about them burning my house down more than anything because I had to travel some and they were there by themselves. I was like, oh my God. It is necessary to be creative, especially where housing is concerned, because you don't want to put somebody, in a position where they're struggling to just put a roof over their head. So I had a case, they weren't retired, but I had a case where they got divorced, but they still lived in the same house. And they did that for about 5 years after the divorce. So, that's a possibility. It's not a probability, I would say, but it is a possibility that could work out for some people.
Wow. I don't know. Take the L out of lover and it's over. That would get awkward if one or the other brought home a new boyfriend, girlfriend.
That's a problem.
I hand it to them.
There's not always that third party involved, just so you know.
Let's talk a little bit about money, because in our conversation a little bit ago, you said money was the leading cause of divorce. And it's because we're not talking about money. And now I think about second marriages and going into second marriages. And I think it's even more difficult to talk about money then, because what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. Yet we still have to come together in the middle. Dena, what would you recommend to someone who's headed into a second marriage and really kind of doesn't want to open up and say, hey, what's there?
No, I think you have to ask that question. You absolutely have to have that discussion in a second marriage. And that would be my advice to anybody that's going into that situation. While you're dating is when you find that out, not after you get married. Okay. So I'm married to my husband. And when we started dating, that was the first thing we talked about was what's the financial situation here? Because I don't want to go into this blind. Right. And I was a lawyer. Obviously, I wasn't making enough money. And so come to find out he was making enough money too. So it was all good. And I will tell you this, my mother was widowed at 45 years old. Okay. And she had me at 10, my brother at 15. My sister was 22, I believe, at that time. So she was married and pregnant, actually. And then, so my mother always taught me that never depend on a man for your income, right? You work and you do your own thing. And even if you're married, you keep your money separate. So I've always done that. So when I met my husband now, that was a conversation I wanted to have right off the bat was that, here's my money over here. Where's yours? And that's what I would recommend. You don't have to keep your money separate if you don't want to, but it certainly makes the divorce easier if you do that. And not that there's going to be a divorce, but the rate of divorce for second marriages is about 65%. The rate for third marriages is even higher. And if you remarry the same person, that rate is off the charts. So, and that's not saying it's going to happen to you. It's not going to happen to me, I don't think. We've been married almost 20 years, and I'm sure we're always going to be married. But, that's just something that you need to think about for sure.
What would be a common scenario because I'm sure that second marriages, people are very protective of their money, and especially if there's disparate wealth. What would be a common scenario? And let's take one of disparate wealth, where one spouse comes in with a whole lot more assets or a whole lot more income than the second one does. That can kind of, I think, create some insecurities and resentments, I would think.
Yes.
What would be a common scenario? Like how would you handle money in that situation?
Well, that is a situation for a prenup, I would say. I did a lot of prenups when I was practicing, and one comes to mind in that situation where he had all the assets and the money. And the prospective bride was a hairdresser and had never saved a dime ever. But he loved her and he really wanted to get married, but he definitely wanted the prenup. And he was my client. So we scheduled we went through the whole thing. We got the prenup done. She was in agreement. I thought she seemed in agreement. And the day came for the signing. And of course, being in Colorado, we were having a snowstorm that day, but she came. My conference room had a glass wall on one wall. And so we sat down and she was angry. You could tell just from the get-go, she was not happy to be there. And he was trying to be as nice as he could. He was being really nice. And she got up. She slammed her chair against that glass wall. I thought, oh my God, I was worried. I thought, if this sucker breaks, I'm in trouble. But anyway, she ran out of the building and she got in her car and squirted out of the parking lot. And he just stood there by me. He said, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I said, well, I certainly don't know what's going to happen. I thought she was all ready. Well, about a week later, she came back. She apologized. She signed the prenup. And I thought, this is not going to work out well. So anyway, about 2 years later, he called me and he said, I just wanted you to know that your prenup stood up in court. Everything's good.
Oh, I didn't laugh.
No, 2 years. And that was that. But I do think getting a very strong prenup on the second and third marriage is really good advice, especially in disparate incomes like that.
I think so.
I think that's just an absolute necessary thing.
It almost like sets the playing rules, if you will, for your finances in your marriage, but it also leaves no secrets out. Like, if you're going to get a divorce, what it's going to look like. And I think that's kind of comforting in a way, and it brings the court costs down a lot.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be that one party takes all the money and the other party's left penniless, which I think is in my scenario, in my story there, that's what she thought. She thought she was getting left out. She wasn't. But I mean, you can make the arrangements in the prenup pretty much ever how you want to. If it's too one-sided, the court's not going to approve it, or they're not going to enforce it, rather. So you want to be careful about that. And of course, you can't, generally I wouldn't let anybody include child support or anything like that, because you don't know what that's going to look like, when it comes time. But,
okay, so you're bringing up some really good points. What are some of the things that a prenup should and shouldn't include?
Well, it should include all the previously owned assets for each party, right? That's the first thing, because that's your separate property. You're coming into the marriage with your separate property, and you're going to leave that marriage, in most cases, with your separate property. In some states, that's the case anyway, without a prenup, but not in all states. So you want to be sure that you set that up. That's the first thing. And then if there's going to be any maintenance paid to the other party. Now, if somebody comes into a marriage and they're not working, or they're disabled, or they're whatever the reason is, you can't just walk away. You can set it up on a scale. Mm-hmm. You can say after 3 years, you get, for up to 3 years, you don't get anything, because that's the state law in some places. And then you get, this amount, and the longer the marriage, the higher the maintenance paid. That's generally how it works. So that's something to think about. And it's kind of, you need, especially if you're the person receiving the maintenance, you want to think about what it takes for you to live. And you don't have to live in the same manner, but you want to be close, right?
You're right.
You don't want to go from living here and then now you're living down here. That's not what you want. And then the court's going to let that happen anyway. So, and I will say this too, just as a warning, not all family lawyers do prenups. So if you are going to get one, be sure you have it done by an attorney that is experienced in that area, because I've seen lawyers say, oh yeah, I can do your prenup, no problem. But they've never done a prenup. But they're not going to tell you that.
Yeah.
So you just need to be sure that whoever you get to do it is experienced in that area, and you can figure that out pretty quick.
Yeah. And I think too, when people like your gal that ran out on you, it's like a prenup is not a negative thing in my mind. As a financial planner, it's like, I know what separate property is. I know what community property is. someone can go into a second marriage with lots of assets and never tell you what they are. And so the whole thing is really, really secretive. A, that's distrust. And B, if I'm the out spouse or that under the spouse with less assets, well, I don't know what that person has. And I've been left out anyway. It's almost like the prenup assures that they're going to be taken care of, where if it's secretive and I keep everything separate and I don't make it community property, they could be less off without the prenup.
That's exactly correct. And that's what I try to always stress, is that this is a protection for both parties. It protects the one with the most assets, but it also protects the other one as well.
Yeah.
And so you really want that to be determined, and also it has to be signed prior to the wedding, and not on the wedding day. Okay, no, it needs to be done a little while before, so that it doesn't look like anybody was coerced to sign it.
Yeah.
And I will say, the closest I ever did one was the day before, and I didn't like doing it, but hopefully they never had to use it, because that would be an issue, I think.
Yeah, I hope not. Well, I know in California, each one has to have their own separate attorney for a prenup.
That's correct.
It can't be the same one, which I think is pretty wise.
Yes, it's very wise. And I've had cases where they refused to go hire anybody else because they thought it wasn't important. They didn't want to spend the money, the time it was going to take, any of that. They just didn't want to deal with it. And I'm like, okay, well, you're going to have to sign this paper saying that you refuse to go hire an attorney, because I'm not having it that you just don't have one, that's not okay. So,
Dena, you're working on a talk that you were telling me about, money, romance, and reality. And you talk about how our brains change, and specifically romance and money. This is an intriguing topic. Tell us more about money, love, and brains, because
money, love, and brains. Okay. Well, I was just saying earlier that sometimes when you meet a certain person and you start dating them and whatever, and you think, oh my God, this is the person that's my forever person, right? This is the one. And it just seems like that's the best thing ever, because you just feel like you're head over heels with this person. You have so much in common. You have the same hobbies, the movies, the music. You like the same food. He never says anything off color, or he's just wonderful. And he feels the same about you. And when that happens, there's a little switch in your brain, I guess, that makes you crazy, and you marry this person, right? And those kinds of feelings generally do lead to marriage. And you just don't talk about the money, how much there is, how little there is, where it goes, how it gets spent. That's not something that comes up.
Everything's perfect. How could this be an issue?
Right. And that's especially true in first marriages, but it can be true in second and third marriages too. I mean, nobody's immune to this.
Yeah.
So, but when there is no prenup and there is no discussion about money, you're going to find it out though later. And what you need to find out ahead of time is how this person, what the money beliefs are for each party, really. And if you don't know what your own money beliefs are, you need to figure that out before you get married, just let me say.
Talk about money beliefs. What's underlying the money beliefs?
Well, are you a saver or are you a spender? Mm-hmm. There are people that love to save money and like to have a big bank account. And then there are people that like to spend their money and go and do and, blow it away. But the other thing related to that is debt. How do you look at debt? How do you handle credit? My mother was a credit manager, so I know about that. She taught me all about credit managing. And how do you look at credit cards? Because these days the credit card debt is astronomical. And some families, when I've done many cases where the debt was higher than the assets. So, you got to deal with that. And then what do you consider to be a safety net? You hear people talk about, well, everybody needs a safety net, especially if you have kids, you need to have money for emergencies and that sort of thing. Even if you don't have kids, I mean, everybody needs that. What do you consider the amount to be? Because if those, one party thinks it's $100 and the other party thinks it's 10,000, then,
You know what? It's crazy, Dena. And I'll ask this in my financial planning practice. And there's some people that need, $50,000, $100,000 in cash. That's my safety net. And then I've heard people say, I still have extra money on my credit card that I could use. I still have extra credit. And it's like, oh, that's not a safety net.
Right. No, debt's not a safety net.
But sure. In their mind, it is. If something goes wrong, I got my credit card. I'm good.
Yeah. I've had people come to me to get a divorce and they didn't have any credit left on their credit cards. They couldn't pay their attorney fee because they couldn't get enough credit, and they certainly had no money. So, it causes a problem. But the other thing is investments. You need to know if that person is a risky investor, if they even do that. But anyway, if they do invest, are they a risky investment or do they stay on the safe side? Because that can be an issue.
That can create some anxiety both ways.
Right. And then along with the debt question, you need to consider, is bankruptcy something that you would consider, or is that a hard no for you?
Yeah.
Because if it's a hard no, then you better handle your debt in a good way. Something to think about.
Lots to think about. And how do they reconcile it if they kind of don't meet in the middle?
Well, usually that's called counseling.
Fair enough.
Lawyers don't do that, but I have a niece that down in Houston. She should be happy to talk to them.
That's funny.
That's what she does. So those are issues that have to be worked out, and that's going to create a lot of compromise. The need for a lot of compromise on both sides. But I do think money. There's people that do money counseling, I guess, right? So that'd be the person that would do that, I think.
You've got a book, Common Sense Divorce, 10 Steps to Save You Time and Money. You see it on the shelf behind you. Mm-hmm. In that book, we won't go through all 10 steps. People can buy your book. But when you think about divorcing, what are some of kind of the biggest errors, most costly errors that people are making that they can avoid? Okay, so I can think of several, but the biggest one, I think the biggest mistake people make is not listening to their attorney. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. And for sure, don't argue with your attorney. I don't care who the attorney is or how much experience they have. They're trying to do the very best they can for you. And arguing with them, especially if you want to argue about the law. I've had people try to argue with me about the law, what the law says. And I'm like, okay, I went to law school and you didn't. So, hey. Listen up, bud.
Yeah. Just pay attention. But that's one thing. And then not doing what you need to do to get through the divorce, such as in most states, you have to gather your financial documents, right? You have to show how much money you make, how much money you have in the bank, all your debt, credit card statements, and just all that stuff. You have to get it all together. I always recommend to my clients, the minute they come to me, I give them the list that they need to get together. Mm-hmm. And that list I have in the back of the book, as well as an appendix. You can read those things. It's quite a lengthy list. And the sooner you get that stuff together and get it to the attorney, the better off you're going to be. Because if the attorney has to send email after email, letter after letter, phone call after phone call, just to get what they need, your bill will go up, 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 up.
And you were saying that, and all I could hear was cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching.
Yeah. A lot of people think, and I had this problem because, I don't come off as an aggressive attorney, I guess, but and that's the other thing. You should never judge a person by how they act in the office, because you don't know how they're going to act in court.
Oh, good point.
And the lawyer will be different, I suspect. I know I was always different in court than I was in my office. I mean, I try to be nice to people so I can get what I need, right? But I'm not necessarily nice in court, and nobody is. I mean, that's not what you're trained to do. You're not trained to go in there and be everybody's best friend. And that's the other thing. Don't ever assume that the lawyer or the judge on either side is your friend. They may be nice to you, like in the hallway or something at the hearing. Mm-hmm. They might be nice to you, but they are not your friend. And so don't act like that. I did become friends with some of my clients, but that was after the fact, not during the representation. So
we were talking about those expensive mistakes, and you've just brought up some really big ones.
Yeah.
Really big ones. We have talked a lot about a lot of wonderful things. Where can I buy your book?
Oh, my book is available on Amazon. You can just go to books and search for Common Sense Divorce, and it should come right up. It's ready there. And it's also in bookstores, and it's at Walmart and just all kinds of places.
I think I'm going to get the book just for the list at the back so I could help my clients. I love it. If you are giving any woman or man advice on second marriages, on divorce, what are some of the best ways that they can protect themselves and still keep their relationship in an amicable place?
Well, first of all, be careful who you think you're going to marry. That's the first thing, and especially on a second and third marriage. And I kind of lump those together, because just people anymore have multiple marriages. And so, and I'm not judging. I'm just, how could I judge them? I'm husband number 3, but whatever. We're not going to talk about that. But I think, you just want to be really careful when you're getting married for those times. You really need to weigh the pros and cons. I'm talking about writing it down. Write down the pros and cons and weigh it carefully in your mind. And if you decide to go forward, be sure you have those money conversations. And another thing you probably need to talk about is kids, because in second and third marriages, there's always his kids and her kids and our kids, maybe, you don't know. But
and even adult children, they can really wreak havoc on, whether the kids are minors or not. Have the kid conversation.
Kids are kids no matter what age they are. That's for sure. They might not be getting child support or, be involved in anything, but they still can cause a lot of trouble.
No, you can, because they're looking at a second wife who could be the potential inheritor of their money. And that's serious stuff.
Yes. And I would say you're not, especially in those marriages, you're not just marrying that person. You're marrying everybody around on both sides. And if those kids either don't like each other, don't like you, don't like the other person, like you said, it can really cause a lot of issues. So that's a real big consideration. When I got married, my husband has 3 children. I have 2. We have 5 grandkids. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah.
We all love each other. We get along great. So that's not the problem. But there's not a problem as far as I know. I'm just saying that's something to consider for sure.
You're fortunate in that way. But now I have a burning question for you. So you have these adult children. Have you talked to the children about what happens? We're going to stay together at the first death. This is what happens. This is kind of how we've had. Have you had those conversations with the kids?
Oh, yeah. We did our wills and all that paperwork when we lived in Colorado, and we had that conversation, who was going to be the executor and how it's going to go and all that. And then when we moved to Texas, we had to redo it because in different states, they have different rules. And, if we were to pass away here, it would be different. So we had it redone, but it's much the same thing, in Colorado, we did a trust and we had everything in the trust, but that's kind of burdensome, I think. So I got rid of that when we moved to Texas, and it's just, just a regular will.
So does the house get sold at the first death and then distributed? Does the house get sold at the second death? IRAs? Do the first death, second death? Like how? I'm just curious, if you don't mind telling us.
No, I don't mind telling you at all.
How did you handle those?
We had a pretty lengthy conversation over several months about this, because I only have 2 kids and he has 3 kids.
Sure.
But I came into this marriage with just as much, if not more, assets than he did. So I didn't think it was right that my kids would share equally with his kids, 5 kids, and they all get the same. So I insisted that my kids get half and his kids get half. That was the only fair way to do it. Well, he didn't agree at first. I said, go talk to your brother and see what he thinks, because he has a brother that takes care of all the money stuff for their family. And so he did. And then he came back and he said, well, okay, I guess you're right. Of course I'm right. Let's just do it.
Of course you're right.
I said, what do you think? I'm not trying to do anything underhanded here. I'm just trying to make sure that my kids are taken care of. That's all.
Yeah. And I don't blame you. I'd do the same.
Yeah. So what we do is whoever dies first everything goes to that person. And then when that person dies, it gets divided half to my kids and half to his. And I think that's the right and fair thing to do.
It is the right and fair thing to do. And, we could go on and talk about Q-tip trusts and, how do we protect it from my spouse marrying someone else? And there's so many things that we could talk about, Dena. We're going to have you on again. We're going to go more into this.
Part one, part two, I guess.
Part one, part two, because there are so many things to learn. There's so many complex issues around love, money, divorce, prenups, estate planning. And there's a lot of issues in family law, that's for sure. There are a lot of issues. I can't thank you enough for your time, your expertise, for being open, and oh my gosh, all the talent that you bring to the table. We're so fortunate to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Advisory services are offered through Barbara J. Norman, LLC, an investment advisor in the states of California and Texas. The information contained herein should in no way be construed or interpreted as a solicitation to sell, nor an offer to sell advisory services to any residents of any state other than the state of California, or where otherwise legally permitted. All content is for information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax or legal advice or provide the basis for any financial decisions. The information contained in this material has been derived from sources believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed as to accuracy and completeness and does not purport to be complete analysis of the materials discussed. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of SagePath Solutions and are subject to change without notice.